good revenue manager needs to try and preempt what somebody's going to come up with and come up with different options. Now, at the same time, that can frustrate them. I've got client where I've presented different options and they don't like them. I know these options are the right thing to do, but it's like cracking that nut. So I talk a lot about to people who, how do I do it, is try and do A/B testing. So even if you've got a portfolio of 100, say, okay, well, can I test it on 5 to 10 units, right? Can I just test it on 5 to 10 and see if this works? Now, you have to be careful because they might get into their head that those 10 units are suddenly going to get 100% occupancy at 20% extra on the ADR, right? So you have to set their expectations, but I think that's a way of doing it.
Welcome to RevLabs by PriceLabs.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of RevLabs by PriceLabs. Today we are doing an interview with somebody that I was introduced to very early in my career at PriceLabs, so it's really exciting to be interviewing him today. We have Neil Fitzgerald with Report Genius. Say hi, Neil.
Hi.
Awesome. So today we're really focusing on your journey as a revenue manager. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you.
Thanks, Becca. Apologies, everyone, that I come with a deep British accent, but I'm sure all the PriceLabs users in the UK will appreciate it. I have been in revenue management since the mid-2000s, and actually I was in cruise. And so I was in the cruise industry in the UK, and I got the opportunity to move over to work in the cruise industry in the US. And I was quite happy doing cruise. And then with COVID and working out what did I want to do long term, an opportunity came up to do pricing for a couple of investors who had apartments across the US. So I did that for a couple of years, got to know everybody at PriceLabs, and then I went back into the cruise industry and then finished up there at the end of last year. I did some consultancy work for people and started doing some consultancy work via Upwork for a couple of different short-term rental operators, and then saw something on LinkedIn about Report Genius and thought, oh, that sounds right up my street. And so here I am. So yes, I've always been in revenue management, but I've been in and out. So I've done cruise, boutique hotels, and vacation rentals.
That's awesome. What's the biggest difference that you would say between the cruise industry and maybe the short-term rental industry? I've actually known a couple of revenue managers that have gone sort of maybe in the opposite direction, where they go from revenue management and short-term rentals to cruises, but it sounds like you went from cruises to short-term rentals. So some lessons that maybe you learned in cruises that you can bring over to short-term rentals. What are the differences? Let's dig in there.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think the cruise industry as a whole has had a lot more investment in data science and forecasting rather than in the short-term rental industry. And I think in the short-term rental industry, and I know, PriceLabs is continuously to innovate. We're continuously innovating our reporting as well. It's the reporting and the data side of things. I mean, I've noticed it coming out of this industry, going back in, and PriceLabs aren't paying me for this, but going back in and seeing the report builder, the portfolio analytics, all of that good stuff, that wasn't even there a couple of years ago. So it's really the data. And I think the key thing is forecasting what's going on. And that's an incredibly difficult science to do. That's something which a cruise line will do. The other side of it as well, of course, is that, for most cruise lines, they've got more revenue centers. You've got the actual cabin, okay, but sometimes they're selling the flight ticket as well. They've got the shore excursions, the drinks, the casino, what have you as well. So, they're looking at the overall totality of what that particular guest or customer is giving you. So not just the cabin, but all of the auxiliary as well. I still think that's an area that short-term rentals haven't got under their belts in the same way that a cruise line would do, or a hotel.
No, I think that tracks a lot. And it's funny that you mentioned forecasting. I can't say anything, but there are some things in the works here. So I'll have to talk to you a little bit after this episode.
Yeah. If you want me to have a look at it, yeah. It's interesting as well, because I was involved in a revenue management systems integration at a cruise line, and we had multiple cruise lines all trying to use the same system. And it's really interesting from the point of view of, you've got your data engineers, you've got your data scientists, you've got your project team, and then you've got the actual analysts using the system, and how you kind of bring that all together. And I think that's something as well, which a good revenue leader needs to have that skill set in taking all of that and communicating what the next steps are going to be as well, and not just relying on the system. Because what I see a lot of is people go, oh, well, the system says this. And I'm like, if revenue management was easy, the robots would do it. Everyone talking about AI, what's going to happen with people's jobs with AI. And I'm like, revenue leaders are still going to have jobs even after AI has got involved and taken over a lot of operations, because you can't leave this all to a computer system. The idea for me, being a good revenue leader, is use the system to get you to think, and then think of your strategy as well, but always be refining your strategy. Don't just rely on any single computer system.
No, I mean, we hear that debate all the time, and even us being the revenue management system, we agree. It is, as an account manager, it's hard to try to get across to people that you probably should still be involved. You can't just trust. Like, I don't want to say that you shouldn't be confident in the system, but there's so much more that you can do with it if you are using your knowledge of the market, of the homes that you're working with. It just really brings you to a whole nother level.
Exactly.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about sort of Report Genius and what drew you to working with them, and sort of what the core for Report Genius is.
Yeah. So what I really like about Report Genius is, there are some different revenue management consultancies out there. What I really like about us is that we're very intentional on who we work with, and we don't just take on additional clients for the sake of it. We want to make sure that each of our clients is getting that individual attention. One of the things that we've got is, on top of all the PriceLabs reporting, is we've got our own fantastic reporting that any owner or operator can log into, and they can see exactly what's going on in their market at any one time. So they don't even have to ask. And that is a big difference as well, because then it frees up the revenue people not doing endless reporting. In previous roles, I've seen it where I spent 50-60% of my time justifying my actions and creating reports. But I'm a huge believer of, don't get too caught up in all of the reports as well. Like, you look at them, but use your critical thinking skills. So to me, Report Genius is software, for want of a better term, and the reporting we've got makes us stand out a little bit different than some of those other revenue management companies that are out there.
No, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, if you are working, you can only work off of the data that you can see and understand. So just having like accessible data just makes everybody's lives so much easier. Even if you're not a revenue manager, if you're an owner or a GM of an office, like, you should still be involved in the revenue management, even if that's not the core part of your job. Having a revenue backed strategy throughout your organization is so key. So how did you get into cruise lines? Like, how did you get into revenue management?
It's funny because, when I started off, there wasn't really any, I think another part of the industry is that there isn't enough certifications and qualifications out there as well. But, when I started, there wasn't. So, I actually, my bachelor's is a history degree, and I was working as like a menswear shop as a tailor. So I was measuring people up for suits, and I went on holiday to a Greek Isle, and I came back and the shop was closing down, and I was waiting for my degree results. And I thought, what am I going to do? And I had previous call center experience. So I spoke with a cruise line in the UK, and I got interviewed doing, basically making bookings. And funnily enough, I almost didn't get the job because they thought I was overqualified. And my hiring manager said, no, I want him because I think he can develop further in the cruise line. So I got my degree, and I was kind of like, what do I want to do next? And they said about staying in customer service and going into leadership that way. And I was like, I'm not a people person. I'm not a people person. And so, one of the leaders there said, well, my husband works in commercial. Have you thought about that? And I thought that sounds quite interesting. So I joined as an assistant. And so, my first pricing role was I was pricing the relatives travel for, the relatives of the crew going on board the ship. And I was pricing the friends and family offers for the staff. I was doing very basic little things. Then I started to do tactical pricing, super close in pricing. Then I was doing more strategic and brochure pricing. And those were the days as well where you were doing it all in Excel. Like, you didn't have any revenue management systems, you didn't have any forecasting tools. It was kind of more gut instinct and experience, and that's how I started. And then I've just seen revenue management as a career, as a discipline, for want of a better term, just explode in the last 10 years.
Yeah, and you hear that a lot, especially for hotels. You can get a degree in revenue management now, but it's not something that everybody knows about or thinks about. And for short-term rentals, there isn't a degree. What you do in hotels does not always translate perfectly into short-term rentals.
Yeah.
So, and it's funny because a lot of times you might think, oh, I'm not a data scientist, I can't do revenue management, or I didn't study economics in college. But your degree of history, I think, is really interesting, because I think for revenue managers, a lot of it is critical thinking.
Yes.
And you don't need to follow that path, especially as this is becoming more of a relied upon and normal practice and an industry in short-term rentals.
Yeah.
If you're out there looking to hire a revenue manager, don't necessarily have your blinders on for this perfect person, because there's a lot of different people out there that could make really incredible revenue managers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. I've hired a lot of people over my time. I've hired people who had accountancy backgrounds, and some of them haven't always enjoyed revenue management as much as they thought, because they felt they were so, well, the data says this, right? And they couldn't get out of the data says this.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that revenue management is an art mixed with science, and it goes back into you not relying on just the data or the system, but having those critical thinking skills as well. And so to me, yeah, a history degree does work, because you get taught how to find the nugget of information that nobody else finds. And that's the key thing for a revenue manager as well, is, I'm sure you've heard it a lot talking to other people. You get some owners who are very much about occupancy, you get some that very much about daily rate, you get some very much about what's going on with the competitor, right? And they look at it and they go, well, this competitor is $5 more than me on this day and $10 more than me this day, and we need to do this. And I'm always like, yes, but you don't know their internal metrics, you don't know their KPIs, you don't know their occupancy, right? You don't know that, right? And you don't know, your units can look similar, but you don't know what tips the guest over to book with A versus B. You just don't know. So you've got to think a little bit more critically about it, and you can't just use like one metric. You can't just say, oh, I want occupancy, because that can massively impact your ADR. You can't say, well, I want ADR, because then it's going to massively impact your occupancy. Like, you've got to take a bite of everything. Mm-hmm. I like in revenue management to, like, you're kind of on a diet the whole time, right? You have your cheat day, right? But you're kind of like taking like my cat, right? I'm cat obsessed, as you know. My cat eats meals for the day. I'm like, a revenue manager is like that. It's not like a dog that just eats all the food in one go. A revenue manager's got to eat a little bit of everything, right?
Yeah.
With the secret sauce.
I love that. That is so cool. And I love your cat too. So talk to me a little bit about, let's go back to the journey, whether in the cruise line or when you're working as a consultant or with the investors. What are some like moments that helped you grow as a revenue manager, lessons that you learned?
Wow. There's so many. So I have to, So, one of them was, I came over to look after the UK market for a cruise line. And I was focused on doing that, and I was really enjoying it. and the cruise line was expanding out in Asia. And so I got the opportunity to work with our new offices out in Asia. So I got to go to Japan quite a lot, and I worked with our office in China and Hong Kong and South Korea and Taiwan. I don't think I've missed anybody. I don't want to offend anybody, but I worked with a lot of the different offices. And so for me, culturally, that was so different. That was so different for me. And so for that, it was very much about, well, how can I communicate effectively to a very different culture, and how can I make sure that I'm respecting the cultural norms, and how but also get my point across as well. So that was really good, because I think sometimes in revenue management we can be too focused on what the spreadsheet says, and we're not always great at communicating. And so I invested a lot of time in how do I communicate as a person to make sure that I was getting my point across. So that was huge for me. Working on the project to integrate a new revenue management system. Each of the different brands within the organization had different requirements. So how could you come up with something that was going to help everybody? How then could you get everybody to trust this system as well? Integrate that when people are working in a certain way. How can you integrate something else into there as well? I would say was really big. And then coming into vacation rentals, coming in during COVID, it was very much like, we're on fire, just get human beings, right? It was just like get and I can remember going into this unit and thinking, this unit's not matching the photos. This isn't quite what it looks like. And I remember saying, like, no, we've got to have more consistency. And these were the days as well where I wrote, got nothing to do with RM, but I was like, somebody needs to do this. Somebody needs to get control of it. I wrote an SOP on how many towels and how many toilet rolls that you need to leave in each apartment, because I was getting quite irate when I then saw the housekeeper going back later on charging us the call out fee to drop off extra toilet paper or extra towels. I was like, no, this is, because to me it was still managing the revenue. I was like, this is cost. And most short-term operators, if they're smaller, don't have a CFO, they don't have a purchasing manager. You're kind of wearing all of these hats. So that was hugely interesting. And then coming back in now is just how the data's improved, and just all the additional features as well. Again, I'm not trying to plug too much, but our own dashboard, I looked at this and I was like, this is cruise level quality. I was playing with this thing and I was like, this thing is amazing. Where was this thing like 4 years ago when I was last doing this? Like where was this thing? I could have really have done with this before. So our own dashboard's been very exciting for me. And then just, all the features that the PMSs are bringing in as well, going back into some of these PMSs I used before. I was like, I didn't know I could do that now. I was like, oh, and then with PriceLabs, like the listing optimizer, I think is a genius move. I'm like, there's so much that the industry's done in the last 2 years since I was last involved with it that's really impressed me. So to me, they're the kind of things that I've really, really noticed.
Yeah. I definitely want to go back on your point about communication, because I think that's key. But I will say, so when we first met Neil, when I first joined at PriceLabs, I was like hire number 20. Like our team was so small. We're now at 250. So the amount that change that I've seen within this time and the amount that we're able to roll out now is like mind blowing. It's so incredible. And it's really good to hear that. Like you appreciate it. And of course, from our other customers as well.
Yeah.
But the first lesson that you touched on was communication. And I think that is so important, because when we're dealing with data, when we're dealing with numbers, all these reports and everything, like I was saying before, you want your organization to be driven by data and to be revenue management oriented. And if you don't have all the stakeholders aligned, everybody on your team aligned with what that means and what these numbers are, and that could just be, that could be your internal team, that could be your owners. If you can't communicate what you're seeing and what you're doing, it makes your job so much harder. I don't know if you've seen that. And I think now as a report genius, you're working as a consultant. So that just adds another layer to it.
Excuse me. Yeah, it does. It's, I think each each company, each client that you work with got different requirements, right? So I've got some clients who are very much like, I don't really want to hear from you. And I don't mean that in a mean way. They're busy with the operations. They're like, you handle all of it. I'm perfectly content, right? And I've got other clients who are very much wanting to debate what the pricing is for the weekend, for next week, compared to next Sunday, compared to other apartments that are, down the street in their particular city. So I think the key thing is understanding what the client wants. And at the same stage, sometimes the clients don't always know what they want. Things can change very, very quickly in the industry. And it's not, I'm going to defend owners here. It's not them being inconsistent. It's them reacting to change in market demands. And I think for a lot of them, they came in during COVID. Short-term rentals almost was a bit of a money printing thing. You see this on TikTok about passive income and arbitrage and how easy it is. And it could have been easy in 21, but now it is difficult. There's been so much extra supply coming in as well. You've seen you've even seen it with some of the massive companies that have undergone restructures or takeovers and what have you. So you're seeing this. And so if you're one of these operators, the sand's shifted underneath you, and that can be a hard conversation to have, and it can be hard. There are some conversations I've had with people where we don't always agree, but I think that a good revenue manager needs to try and preempt what somebody's going to come up with and come up with different options. Now, at the same time, that can frustrate them. I've got a client where I've presented different options, and they don't like them. I know these options are the right thing to do, but it's like cracking that nut. So I talk a lot about to people who, how do I do it? Is try and do A/B testing. So even if you've got a portfolio of 100, say, okay, well, can I test it on 5 to 10 units, right? Can I just test it on 5 to 10 and see if this works? Now, you have to be careful, because they might get into their head that those 10 units are suddenly going to get 100% occupancy at 20% extra on the ADR, right? So you have to set their expectations. But I think that's a way of doing it. It's those A/B testing, and then it's the communication. I track everything, so I get laughed at a bit by people, but I have a tracker, and it's got like, this is the unit number, this is its minimum, this is the base, this is the new minimum, this is the new base, this is what PriceLabs says, this is what the 7-night occupancy is, this is what the market is, this is the 30-day, this is against the MPI, how much does it hit the minimum price, this is what's going on. And then what did I do to the base price, what did I do to the group customization as well? And I have it all tracked. So then I can go back. So, if at the end of the month, they're like, why is my occupancy down, or why is my ADR down? I'm like, well, a month ago, this is what was going on in your market. This is why I did it. Now, sometimes people might still not like the answer, but I think most people are reasonable and go, okay, I can understand their thought process.
I love that. I think that makes a ton of sense. I work with a lot of revenue managers, both at PriceLabs, but also as a part of, RevProf. And we always talk about how, revenue management is like a science in a way, having hypotheses, testing those hypotheses, and then adjusting based on the results. And keeping track of what you're doing, especially when you're managing larger portfolios, will make your life a whole lot easier in the long run. When things don't turn out the way you want, or things do, and maybe that's only for part of your portfolio. Keeping track of what you're doing is huge, and then being able to communicate that. This time has gone by so quickly. I do have one last question. You kind of alluded to it, and as we were talking, but markets are changing. What is and this is so broad, I hate when people ask me this, so I'm sorry for asking you it. But what is your I guess it's now August. So what is your fall outlook looking like? Like, what are some major things that you're seeing in these markets? Las Vegas has been in the news a lot lately. What are you seeing?
So I don't think Vegas is people like it's the canary in the coal mine. No, I think Vegas is its own separate beast. And again, it's an example of in COVID, it was a money printing thing, and people have got too greedy, and now the sands have shifted. So I don't think Vegas is a sign for the whole tourism industry in the US. I do think it is hyper local. I think one of the things I can certainly say is to see it that if you're in a location with events, the weekend event pricing is still holding, right? So if you've got a concert, whether it's Oasis or whether it's Morgan Wallen, whoever it is, I'm seeing that definitely. There's definitely a bump there, and the same bump with NFL weekends and with college football. I think that there's a risk of people getting too greedy on that and thinking, well, I got one booking at $1,000 a night, therefore I'm going to get 10 more at $1,000 a night. But what I'm seeing is that people are willing to spend money still if it's that overall experience. So there's still consumers out there who are going to do that. I think if you're in an area that doesn't have that steady footfall of conventions, concerts, football games, it is definitely more of a struggle. I've noticed that since spring. I've seen people where they had a good spring, they had an okay spring, and it's gone very, very quiet, and it's looking quiet further out as well. And again, that's a difficult conversation to have for people, because I always say you're only as good as your last month's figures. So if your ADR drops by $10 or your occupancy goes down, people naturally, quite rightly, are going to go, what's going on? So again, it goes into your revenue manager having that sort of early warning system, for want of a better term. Sometimes hosts, owners, operators don't want to hear it. Sometimes they are wedded to a particular unit price, and it doesn't matter how many times you tell them that that's not the price they can get in the market. That's the price they're going to do, and there's nothing you can do to change their mind. And you also know when to give up and when not to beat a dead horse, for want of a better term. But I think most people, if you can communicate it and spot it early, most people are reasonable. And again, if you test it, do the A/B testing and see if that can work. But I would say it's incredibly hyper local, and I would say watch your booking patterns. If you can't do it daily, on a weekly basis, look how many bookings you're getting week on week.
I think that's a great place to wrap up.
Yeah.
I think that makes a ton of sense. I love that advice. Well, Neil, always lovely. So great to reconnect. Thank
Always
you
a pleasure.
for your time. And I guess we'll talk soon. If anybody wants to get in touch with Neil, are you active on LinkedIn? How would they get in touch?
Certainly am. You can find me on LinkedIn, Neil Fitzgerald, or you can email me, neil@, getreportgenius.com.
Beautiful. Thanks so much. Until next time, y'all.
Cheerio. Bye.